Today's broadcast of Husson University's Distinguished Speaker Series is brought to you by MMG Insurance, protecting your piece of the world.
Welcome to the 2024-25 Distinguished Speaker Series. Today, businesses must continually seek new information and transform knowledge into strategy. To facilitate this process, Husson University, home of the largest business college in Maine, is pleased to continue to present the Distinguished Business Speaker Series sponsored by MMG Insurance. This series, launched in conjunction with the opening of Husson's College of Business building, Harold Alfond Hall, in 2021, has included dynamic speakers from a variety of disciplines, ranging from banking, government and security, to management, marketing, and more. Its main objective is to educate students, alumni, and community members on the challenges facing businesses and related professions, as well as to inspire those who will become our future leaders. Today, we welcome Melissa Smith, the Chair, CEO, and President of WEX, leading the company's transformation into a global financial technology leader. Since joining in 1997, she has held various leadership roles, including CFO during the company's IPO in 2005. She was named CEO in 2014 and Chair in 2019. Under her leadership, WEX has grown from a US-based fleet card provider into a global B2B payments company, with revenue tripling from $818 million in 2014 to $2.55 billion in 2023. WEX now operates in 5 continents and employs approximately 7,000 people worldwide. Known for bold decision-making and a focus on innovation, Melissa has integrated technologies like AI and electric vehicle payments into WEX's offerings. Her leadership has earned her the recognition in outlets such as Bloomberg, CNBC, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal. She was named into Boston Globe's Tech Powers Player 50 in 2023, and she's received multiple leadership awards, including the Globee and Stevie Awards for Women in Business. Melissa serves on the board of WEX and is involved in community initiatives in Maine Health and the Center for Grieving Children. A former USA triathlon coach, she's competed in several marathons and triathlons and is committed to fundraising for the Maine Cancer Foundation. Melissa holds a bachelor's degree in business administration and an honorary doctorate from the University of Maine. Welcome, Melissa, and thank you for joining the speaker series today to discuss your personal leadership journey.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, Melissa. Thank you so much for joining us on the stage here at the Gracie Theater. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it, Dean.
Yes, and such a long list of things that we can talk about today.
I know. It's wonderful.
Wonderful. Well, I want to start with all of the students in the audience thinking about your work life first, and then we'll get to the marathons, I promise, because I think there are some in the audience that might be interested in those too. But can we go back in time, not that far, but to your first job? And when you think about that, what did you do? And what do you remember about it?
Yeah, you know, my first job, just to put in context, I grew up in a really small town. And so when I was in college, I didn't really even understand what options were out there for my career. I got very lucky because I had one of my college professors take an interest in me. And when I took accounting, I knew I wanted to be in business, so I had like a general idea.
Yes.
I had this professor, when I was taking accounting classes, write on my tests, I think this should be your major. I think that you should consider being in public accounting. And he, really provided and opened a door for me of what are some of the options of what you can do in life. So I, at his counsel, ended up picking public accounting. And I was very focused on working at one of the bigger accounting firms. And at the time, I started working for Ernst & Young,
Okay.
right out of college. And I had an opportunity to work for pretty much all of the big public accounting firms, but I picked E&Y because the people I interviewed with felt like me. They felt like my people, and I was joining a place that where I felt like I would belong.
So I love two things about what you just said. One, that your professors took an interest, that professor in particular, that's so impactful. I know there's several in the audience that have done the same thing with our students. And then two, the feeling at that place that you went to work at Ernst & Young, it felt different maybe than some of the other experiences?
Yes, it felt, well, first of all, Dr. Geiger, who is that professor, I actually saw him a couple of years ago, and he was very humble about the impact he's had. He's like, you've had this big career. I was a college professor, and like, how many lives have you touched? I'm sure I'm not the only one. So the people who are in that profession have this ability to really help mold you when you're at that age in such a wonderful way. So I'm incredibly appreciative of that. Yeah. And then I do think that when you make choices in your career, I think people too often make choices based on money or some predetermined thing that they want, and being really open and understanding what's important to you. And for me, people are really important to me, and being around people that I want to be with as much as you spend time working is really important to me, and always has been. And it's been one of my guiding principles when I've made choices. It's been almost at a gut level of, when I'm with these people, do I feel like they're people that I want to spend lots of time with? Can I have fun with them? Can I be intellectually stimulated? And can I feel like I can learn as you go through your career? And that was true of the people that I met from Ernst & Young.
Oh, and what a great thing in the first kind of layer of a professional job to find that.
Yes.
That's not always true, of course. Going into public accounting, tell me a little bit about how long you stayed in that track for yourself.
Yeah, what I was attracted to was this idea that you're not going to an office every day, you're actually going to other people's locations, and you have so much contact with other people. And I loved that. I loved the fact I was working with different people and different clients. You very quickly learned how to navigate both managing others, and because you were doing it with a budget of time, but also how to manage all the different personalities that you're meeting with. And so I was really happy. I could have stayed there probably forever in my career. I ended up staying until I was a manager, and one night I had gone to a dinner, and I was going there honestly to look for clients, it was more in a sales capacity, and the person I was having dinner with called me the next day and said, hey, I have this job opening at the company was called Red Express at the time. I'd love for you to come and interview with me. And I said, not really interested. And he's like, well, you know what? Actually, I think you should come meet our CEO. He's pretty dynamic. I'm like, okay, I will do that. And I met with the CEO at the time, and he was incredibly charismatic. I'm still in touch with him. His name's Paul Walsh. And he talked about the company in a way. He said, listen, it's the type of company where any individual can make a difference. You will be rewarded for your efforts, and you can grow your career here because the growth of the company will fuel your professional growth. Wow. And after kind of a back and forth with him, I ended up going. And at the time, the company was barely making money. 50 million in revenue. It was like just kind of this startup that had popped up over the years. And I went because, again, I felt this connection to him, and I felt the connection to the mission of what they were trying to do. The people there were so intent on growing that actually felt interesting, and also felt interesting for me to instead of sitting there advising or auditing, being in it and actually being responsible for the results you generated. And I it was one of the best moves, obviously, that I've made.
Which was unplanned, as you
Yes.
just described.
Yes.
So, it is really taking advantage of those opportunities. You never know, is what I hear from that, too.
Yes, I think you never know, and being really open is important. Open to the people around you, and
Sure.
like that night meeting, just it was happenstance, to meet him, but obviously made enough of a connection that it actually drew me someplace.
It's interesting, too, because I know our students will have those opportunities with what they haven't planned. How did you exit from Ernst & Young? I think that's kind of an important transition piece for them to understand, too.
Yeah, no, I think actually graceful exits are really important because that's what people remember.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I'm a big believer in having graceful exits along the way. And, when I exited, I went to, I had left to go work for this other company, but most of my friends are from that point in my life. My best friends are from my early career working at Ernst & Young.
Yeah.
We travel together, you actually work really hard, you
Right.
form really strong
Yes.
relationships.
Long
And
hours, for those that are counting in the audience, long hours.
it is, but it was a really fun part of my career because I'm working with people my age that are like really having very similar objectives in life, at that point in time, and so really fun. And so as I exited there, and the people that I've worked with, not even just my friends, or people that I've stayed connected with over the years, the man who was the office and managing partner, I had dinner with him for years. He's been retired for a long time, but for many, many years after that, we stayed connected. And you never know where your journey's going to go, so you want to leave on good terms, but also, if you can continue developing those relationships, what that's going to lead next.
I think that's super important, just thinking about those pieces too, from what you can do. So Right Express, I know you said just $50 million. For some of our students, that might not sound like a small company. So perspective-wise, though, for them, they were just starting out.
Yeah, the company had been around for a while.
Okay.
When I first joined, now it's now called WEX. It's been around for over 40 years now. But so I joined 28 years ago, like a long time ago now.
We'll pretend that's...
So it had been around for a dozen years by the time I joined there. But it had been started by a family. It had been bought and sold a number of times. And I think my first couple of years there, we were bought and sold 5 times maybe.
Wow.
And so a lot of change that was happening kind of at this level, but in terms of what we were doing and the mission and what we were trying to achieve, actually that was pretty constant. And so when I joined, I had moved into a senior financial analyst role.
Okay.
I had wanted to do something other than accounting with my career.
Right.
And that was part of the appeal. Is more understanding the trends that are happening in the business to help drive future decisions. And I had this wonderful position where I get to go to the executive leadership team meetings and give my perspective. I'm 25 maybe.
Wow,
no, actually I would have been 27 at that point in time.
It's okay, we're not going to count.
But the CEO was really good about giving me exposure and giving me a voice at a pretty young age, and able to actually help with crafting some of the strategy that was happening at the company level. And I think, again, that was really important because I became so I started there in 1997.
Okay.
And by 2001, I was the CFO. So I had, in those first few years, I was promoted senior financial analyst, and then I became the manager of an FP&A, then I became the controller, and then I became the CFO, all
That's
within
quick.
4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, again, being in the middle, being willing to have an opinion, I'm a big believer in if you get the chance, then you actually have to have a voice. And that means you have to be willing to take some risks, because what you say may not be, the most favorable thing to the person at the moment. You actually have to put some friction in the room.
That's an interesting piece. So this gentleman that recruited you, he did give you an opportunity for a voice.
Yes.
How did that feel when you had to present opposing thoughts, perhaps very early on in a career?
Yeah, what I've learned is often when I was doing that, it was in private.
Okay.
So you can have, and I mean that in a way that I think it's much easier for people to hear you when you're not doing it in a big setting.
Sure.
So if you can have that conversation, then when you repeat it in a bigger setting, it's not as controversial because you're not surprising someone that you have a different perspective. And then it wasn't like I was taking hugely controversial views, but there were things at the time, like when I first started, we had a lot of turnover of employees.
Okay.
And we could talk about, like, listen, that just doesn't make any sense. It's like it's not good culturally. It's also not good financially because you're spending a lot of time recruiting.
Right.
And so, but having those conversations around, okay, what do we need to do differently to make that not happen in the future?
Yes,
And,
definitely.
And so they were like data-informed conversations as opposed to just, this is what I believe in the world.
Right.
So it was still in context of what I was doing, professionally.
But you were listened to. I think I hear that as well.
Yes.
Or did you feel that?
And also there would be some pushback. My first couple of bosses I worked for this wonderful man who ended up moving on and becoming a CFO of other companies. And he always would say no to me. It was really hard. I would come in, I'd tell them what I thought, and he would be like, no. And
so you expected that after a while,
you did,
maybe?
and actually what I learned over time is the magic of that was that you had to really think through your position when you went in there with him because you knew that you're going to get some type of a pushback.
Sure.
And so you had to be prepared for your counter. And so even though it felt difficult at the time, it actually was a really good learning experience for me because I learned how to have a debate and how to be not just thinking at a surface level, but thinking one level below that.
And emotionally, in that particular circumstance, how did you feel like with hearing that no? Were you able to just focus on those numbers, focus on that debate, or was that tough?
No, it made me more determined. It brought out the okay.
Yeah.
It was going to be this, conversation. Actually, my favorite person I ever worked for was, he just retired actually from Maine Health. He was this wonderful man because he was a combination of fun. We were traveling once. This was when I worked for Ernst & Young. And after work, there was a group of us that were going go-karting, and he actually paid the go-kart attendant to give me the slowest go-kart. So then he lapped me, we'd go around and wave at me as he went by. So it was super fun. But then when we got into work, I remember I had done this work paper and had spent all this time on it, and I came over to talk to him, and he literally ripped it up in front of me and said, "Not good enough, start again."
Wow.
And so I think that when you work with people who are demanding, it's actually not a bad thing because if you can take away pieces of, okay, what do I want to learn from this? And how can I make this help me be better at what I do and not take it personally?
Yeah.
I think that, and I say that because these relationships are all done actually with well intent.
Of course.
As opposed to ill intent. I put that in a whole different category.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. But that's such an interesting piece too about what can you learn from each leader that you've had.
Yes.
And do you carry some of those parts today?
Yes.
In your role?
Both ways, what I like and what I don't like. I mean, there are things that I've watched over the years where I don't like command and control environments. I've never wanted somebody to tell me what to do. I want them to tell me the outcome of what they want.
Sure.
And I will figure out how to get that.
Good, yeah.
But don't micromanage me. And so that has been one of my big mantras of let people have the flexibility to show what they can do and to do it in a way that gives them the space to do it in their own way.
That empowerment's so important. I think we hear the word around that to be trust as well, that you're trusting people to do the job that you've hired them to do. Yeah,
it's a trust, and there's an accountability element to
it.
Like, so if you don't do it, that's fine, but have a conversation with me about it.
Yes,
And so I think that what I've learned along the way is what I want to be, and that has gotten, it's been more refined, but also changes over time. I find early in your career, you're very interested in establishing yourself.
Yes.
And so I always wanted to be the person doing it and in it. If it was hard, give me the hardest thing you have, give me the biggest problem you have. And then over time, you get into this arc where it becomes much more about how are you developing other people and giving them the shot of doing the hard thing, giving them the shot to do the presentation where they get exposure. And so you get satisfaction out of different things at different points in your career.
So true. I mean, that aligns with teaching as well,
Yes.
right? You know, so
Yes.
really you're teaching those that are
Yes.
behind you to potentially take what you're doing someday.
Yes, and then nothing gives me more satisfaction right now is watching somebody nail it, you know,
Yeah.
or get a promotion, or, you know, I find great satisfaction out of that, because you
Right.
feel like, okay, you had some contribution in their success, even though it's small, but you allowed them that ability to shine.
Well, the business that you're in, we've talked kind of about what you've done in this ascension piece, but can you tell a little bit about WEX?
About WEX, yes,
because
yes.
I think some of the audience may not really be familiar with the organization and how
I'd
it's
love
changed
to.
over time.
Yeah, so WEX, so our sole purpose is to simplify the business of running business. So think about, we're looking for places that businesses have complexity surrounding payments. And we do that exposed to 3 different primary verticals.
Okay.
And when we're thinking about the products that we're creating in the marketplace, what we're trying to do is use advanced analytics and payments capabilities. So think of this as we're streamlining our workflows, and we're using advanced payment capabilities in order to do that. And the industries are mobility, which is where the company started. So think of that as it could be a local landscaper that is interested in making sure that people are only paying for things that they should pay for their vehicle, all the way up to, we do business with 9 of the 10 largest oil companies in the world.
Okay.
We do business with all the major leasing companies in the United States, and so tremendous reach. Over 20 million people use the products that sit across that, and they're all businesses. And the second vertical for us is corporate payments, which people in the audience would actually indirectly use those products. If you were to go online and book a hotel room, we make payments on behalf of that online travel agency. So you use your consumer card at first, but we facilitate payments globally.
And so we wouldn't be seeing that.
You wouldn't see it, it's just happening in the background seamlessly. It's
Right.
amazing, it's all API driven, the high tech model that we have across the portfolio. And then the last thing is benefit payments. So if people who have HSA or FSA card, any tax deferred program, our technology is making sure that you're paying for things that are allowed by the IRS. And so we do that for over 50% of the Fortune 1000 companies.
Wow.
Again, 21 million consumers that are using our products in that case. We have 250 billion of spend that went across our platforms last year. So
amazing.
Yeah. So when I think about the company, when I say 50 million when we first started, and we were 2.6 billion last year. So it's like you just, there's so much evolution that happens in that arc of how you operate when you're smaller and how you operate as you get bigger. It just changes.
So changes in the number of people, certainly technology at this point as well over your time. What are some of those big changes that you've seen for the business?
A lot of change and I think of it in increments. When we went public, that was a big change. So, being a public company got rid of all of the, noise that was creating by different ownership structures along the way, and it really gave us the ability to focus on growth. I would say, like, that's when that unrelenting focus on innovation and growth really started in 2005.
Wow, so 20 years.
Yeah, no, we just celebrated, we just rang the bell again at the stock exchange for our 20th anniversary. Yes, which is actually super cool.
Yeah.
And then, when we became international, when we first, the first business we bought internationally was in Australia, so it's like baby steps went into an English-speaking country, albeit halfway around the world. But over time, if you look at, we've talked about the 7,000 employees. Yes. A large amount of them, almost half actually, are sitting outside of the United States.
Wow.
And so that, when you bring that together, it really does change the perspective.
Of course.
Of the company, and so we've diversified the revenue streams, we've diversified where we do business.
Sure.
All of that has made the company very different, over time. But I would say, like, if you were to ask someone 20 years ago or 25 years ago, what do you like about working at WEX? It's a very value-driven company.
Okay.
It would be remarkably consistent.
So that's amazing.
What they don't like, over time has changed.
Sure.
And that's great feedback too, because those are things that we're constantly working on. But we have great employee engagement scores. We beat any technology benchmark each year, very low attrition. It's a wonderful company culture.
And so that culture piece, you mentioned value-driven.
Yes.
So I certainly know that these students are much more familiar with mission statements,
Yes.
with values for themselves and for organizations that maybe I didn't recognize back along. So now with people all over the world, how do you pull them in to your values, to your culture, to make them feel a part of something maybe smaller but bigger at the same time?
We're very declarative.
Okay.
And we start even in our recruiting process. So if people are out there looking, they would see actually we have value videos that are out there that talk about, from our employees around the world are talking about what it's like.
Interesting.
So our values are act with integrity, put in ingenuity to work, stick to it, stay open. When you think about the type of people that work there, we call ourselves passionate problem solvers.
Oh, okay.
People are very connected. They're very connected to our customers. They're very connected to one another. And that comes through, one of our values is be a positive force.
Okay.
Like we care a lot about giving back in the communities that we're in and making sure that we're leaving a footprint that we're proud of across. And that comes across within how the relationships are both with customers. I would say I was in San Diego with a big customer event last week. Almost every conversation starts with, let me tell you about this person that I work with at WEX,
lovely.
which is great. Like you want them to love your products, but
Right.
but people want to do business with people, and it starts with that connection of the individual that's there. And then I would say that how we pull it through, we talk about it a lot, but we also, everybody, when they go through the performance evaluation in the course of the year, our part of their evaluation is on leadership behaviors. So did I actually do, it's not just what you do, but how you do it that we think is really important. And our biggest award in the year is what we call our President's Club Award, which is, I love this thing, it's been there, Paul actually started it. Any employee can nominate any other employee. It doesn't matter who you are in the company. It's not just sales oriented. And you get to go on a trip with your person of choice. It could be partner, spouse, sometimes parent, child, although typically it has to be a teenage child.
Sure.
And we take them someplace really exotic, but the nominations are built on not just what you did, but how you did it. And so we think both things matter equally, and you can't actually, if you can't do one thing but you don't do it in the right way, that's not actually going to leave the footprint we want.
So that legitimatizes, people understand those values, they're living them.
They're living them, and we just think that's part of the expectation of being employed there, honestly, and we think it's part of what makes it special to be employed there.
You had mentioned high turnover before back along, and it sounds now with the engagement that that's less of an issue, but...
Yes, I would say that hasn't been an issue for 20 years, like a long time.
Wow.
When I took over CEO, it was a great culture.
That's wonderful.
My job was just don't mess it up, just make it better.
Don't mess it up.
Really, make it better along the way if you can, but
Sure.
yes, I think that... So Paul was, he was the CEO when I first got there. The next CEO, his name is Mike Dubiak, who I'm good friends with. He was very much an advocate of the what and the how. And I think that, that made a huge difference. That's in the period of time where turnover stabilized, and we became a much better, more value-oriented company, because of his influence.
So those are my two favorite questions of what and how. So that's fabulous to be bringing those up. What's different today versus maybe 5 years ago about the culture? Is there anything that you would identify, particularly in light of COVID and how we've gone through those pieces?
Well, the world's different, and you can see that reflected in our culture to to a certain extent. I think that we learned a lot of lessons during the COVID period, which is really important in periods like right now.
Yes.
We learned how to be much more nimble. That first year of COVID was the first year that we didn't grow.
Okay.
We didn't shrink much, but we didn't grow.
Yeah. People
And
weren't
so-
traveling and using some of those platforms in the same way.
Yes, when you
as
think
one
about
example.
as the world shut down, like our
Yeah.
travel portfolio shut down. The people just weren't traveling at all. And so
Right.
in this part of our business, which is a couple of $100 million, just went to zero. And so
Right.
that was actually the biggest impact across our portfolio. But that taught us a lot because up until that point in time, we think of kind of up and to the right, everything was
Going in the right
like
direction.
everything was going in the right direction. And it taught us some really good lessons on resiliency because things
Okay.
didn't go exactly the way we wanted to. We had right before the pandemic, we had signed up to acquire a couple of businesses in the travel space.
Oh, wow.
And for $1.7 billion. And we ended
just
up,
pocket
yeah, I
change.
know. We ended up in litigation. You know, so
Okay.
like personally, really difficult. So I'm calling the people that we were going to do this transaction with and
Yeah.
say, oh, by the way, there's this provision in our contract that says if something big changes in the world, we don't actually have to do this.
And something big
And
changed.
then something big did it, and we're not going to do this. And their
Wow.
recourse, which is what it should be, was to sue us. And so we had to testify remotely
Okay, yes.
in the British court system because the contract was was crafted in the UK.
Wow.
And won.
Yeah, yeah.
One settled, ended up acquiring this business for $565 million, I think, 5 something.
Okay.
So it's significant, like the price we should have
Significant
paid.
less,
Right? Like it was
yes.
fair trade.
Yes, yeah.
But I think all of that, taught us a lot of
Sure.
muscle memory around how to be nimble, how to be resilient. Things don't always work the way you expect they're going to work, and
Right.
how do you make sure that you're communicating with people as you go through that process. It also, in that period of time, we've become much more distributed. We were always distributed,
Yeah.
but we have employees literally everywhere.
Wow.
And so I think that, for us, learning how to work in a way that's highly effective. And our CTO lives in California.
Okay.
Our head of our benefits business lives in California. Our chief digital officer lives in Dallas. The rest of the group works in Portland, Maine, but
Yeah.
we all travel.
Yeah.
So even if we're physically located there,
Right.
we're typically off on the road. I was talking to one of the guy who runs our international business last night, who was in Singapore. So we have had to learn how to
Yes.
work together at pace with people all over the place, and I think that has been a new skill for us, and also learning how to just be more nimble at scale has been just a new skill for us.
Well, you mentioned communication, and
Yes.
certainly time zones coming into play immediately with that thought, but has your communication method changed as this has spread, your workforce has spread, even your senior group has spread? What does that look like today?
100%. Like I think that yes. The ways that I think about when we were smaller, everybody would come into one space. And
Right.
that was
Walk down the hallway,
Yeah,
have a
walk down the hall. It
conversation.
was so much easier.
Yes.
And I had a big mantra around, you wanted people to want to come to these things. I tried to make them entertaining.
Sure.
Like I rappelled down once, we would make it into a show.
Oh, wow.
Like when we could do it all in one space, and then over time it became much more have and have not. So if you try to do something in Portland, but we only have about 1,500 employees in Maine of the 7,000, so people are like literally
Wow,
everywhere. And
yes.
so we do a lot more virtual communication, but we use tools in order to make sure that people,
Sure.
like if they're remote, they can actually ask questions, you can participate. So we've had to really change the way that we talk. Even in pre-COVID, I would make tours of offices. We have people who are working from home a lot more now. So I still do
Sure.
tours of our bigger offices.
Right.
But I have to make sure that I'm connected to the people who are not. And so just a lot more thought around the communications, the mediums. We do a lot of video. We have a videographer on staff.
Wow.
So that you can
well,
do
that's
like
good
quick.
to hear for our NISCOM students, right? To actually
You could do
have
like
that.
right, because when people just get tired of email, or so what we've
Yes.
learned is we have to still make it entertaining. So there has to be enough information or content or entertainment value that it's worth it for people to look at it.
Right.
We have to synthesize what we're doing so they're not getting hit by everybody, and we have to use multimedia. in
Yeah.
order to,
So they don't get bored.
So they don't get bored, or if you're a different generation, you might want to connect in a different way. And so you have to make
Absolutely.
sure that we're meeting people where they are.
So no more repelling, is that?
No more. Can
Can you tell me about that? Because that just kind of attracted me to that comment. What happened there?
So we used to do at one of our big events, we would have a theme associated, and that year it was a 007 theme. And they had said to me, we were at one of the auditoriums in Portland, and they said, "Do you mind rappelling?" And I said, "Sure, I'm fine with that." What I didn't realize is that, that it was a person holding a rope. That was my rappelling. It wasn't like I was picturing a machine that you'd rappel.
Right. Please don't
people.
drop
To
me.
be fair, there were 2 people, but yeah. So like the conversation before I went up was like, "You really got this, right?"
Wow.
Well,
That's a risk. Thank you for
yes, I know, but it was fun, and
Yes.
we were always, and I would say still, like last week when I was in San Diego, we had a customer event.
Okay.
And we did a product rollout for our benefits business, and on stage we had the 2 people, the GMs that are running the business. We had the head of technology and the head of product.
Yeah.
And in between, so they had high visuals, so think big screen explaining the technology in a way that people can understand it, and showing visuals, the UX of what the next release is going to look like. But we also had the MC of the business who works at WEX come on stage, and he would do vignettes of songs. And so he would take the content of what we're releasing and create words to a song that people would know.
Oh my. I feel like a failure with this talk now. If I was supposed to sing today, I'm not sure.
It was great, because at the end of it, you had customers standing up singing.
Oh my gosh.
And so they're going to walk away.
Great engagement.
Right. We just think more about having moments that matter. So we're not going to have people together every day.
Sure.
But when we do, we want you to remember them.
Well, I love that you said UX, or user experience. Any students that have taken that class certainly understand now the importance of that, how that's integrating, and there's benefits, but you're talking about user experience, and that's maybe even more important than the actual benefits. Is that fair to say?
Well, if you stand up there and talk about what people are going to get, it's hard to actually relate. If you show people what they're going to get, then they can say, okay, I understand that, and yeah, I really like that, but maybe I don't like this part as much, and they can actually actively give you feedback.
Wow, yeah.
And the way that we're thinking about that part of the business, it's AI first, and so there's just so much.
Yes.
There's so much built in of what you can do. It's a really exciting time.
Well, and I think that's important. You were talking to the students earlier about AI with applications and everything, and now to hear AI in this piece. AI is intersecting pretty much all of your business at this point. Is there an area that you see is going to be the biggest growth for you with AI in the future?
Yeah, we are in this privileged spot. One of our board members, longstanding board members, is a serial entrepreneur.
Okay.
But he also teaches AI at Harvard Business School.
Okay.
And so he is like really locking into this. Every employee at the company has had a chance. They may not have all taken it, but 100% of our leadership team, director and above, has been trained on AI.
Great.
And the places that we're using it heavily in our development center. So we've been for a couple of years using that as a tool to help code.
Yes.
We're using it to do things like, as we roll out products, one of the things we're trying to do is to get feedback from customers about what a product is.
Right.
We can create synthetic customers that allow you to, instead of getting slowed down to go and talk to lots of people, you can actually create a synthetic group. Wow. We've created synthetic board of directors that we go through our strat planning that help ask questions. So we are really deeply in this.
Yes.
Now we're a technology company. A third of the company are technologists.
Right.
So this is a place that we feel like we have a chance to really have a competitive advantage. But we think about it both in terms of productivity, which is almost defense. You actually have to reinvent the way you're getting work done, but also creating different experiences for our customers through the use of AI.
And this is a conversation you would have been having with me pre-COVID, or when has this come along for you?
Like pre-COVID, so we've always used machine learning, which is in the AI, fold. But the intense focus that we've had on AI is really when Gen AI,
Okay.
you know, really when that became a thing, and as it's become a much more affordable, you know, piece, we've added in a lot of skill you know, within the company that
Sure.
has either data analytics or AI into their
Amazing.
background, and it's just creating so much more possibility about what we can do, and it almost feeds off itself.
So what's so interesting is that becomes kind of what we call a stackable credential to some of the other skills that people are bringing forward. So I
Yes.
love that you're training your leadership and others in the company around what's current. So that's a great piece. That shows, I'll call it a learning organization. You're allowing them to learn, and that seems important in kind of your philosophy too.
I think in particular with AI, what I found was that people are scared of it.
Yes.
You know, probably not this audience, but I'd say like
Maybe a portion of the audience, I don't know.
but a lot of people were scared of it, and so part of the training
Yeah.
was to kind of demyth, you know,
Yes.
to say actually you can remove a lot of the chafe in your day, and you can focus on more interesting work if you can
Right.
lean into the tools. But I think it starts from like the senior people in the company. Like if
Yes.
I right now am creating a synthetic investor.
Okay.
To help do Q&A. And if I can talk about how I'm using AI in a way that people can like, okay, that's interesting, as opposed
Yes.
to that's like terribly scary.
Right, right.
I think that it trickles in.
helps.
And yeah, and right now people are really engaged. We do this survey periodically to talk about how are the tools helping you, are you using them or not. The majority by far of the company are using them. On
Okay.
average, they're saving 4 hours a week in time.
Wow.
In order to just use the various tools, and some of them might be just like Gemini, or ChatGPT, or some
Yes.
more basic tool, and then other people are using much more sophisticated tools.
And to me, just hearing 4 hours to gather back, to be able to do things,
Yes.
so important. I probably should have asked before we started if you made a synthetic me before we came to the stage. I'm a little bit concerned about that. But this is, I mean, I think this is so important as our students are using ChatGPT, but they may be using closed-end AI for protection in different areas, and
Yes.
I'm sure that's also coming into play for you with some of these, the things that have to stay confidential and all of those pieces.
Yes, we had to put a lot of thought into how we're using AI before we started.
Sure.
And it's a bit of a Wild West out there, you know,
It
in terms
is,
there's not a lot of
yes.
regulation, and so
Right.
I feel like that will become very iterative in itself. But we had, you know, with our
exciting.
customers, giving them comfort that the way that we're doing this is responsible and
Right.
and very thoughtful.
Well, it's what's so interesting to me is we may not have known a lot about WEX before we started this conversation, but the fact of where it's showing up and now people being more aware. For you, when you're showing up for work, even though obviously work's important, what else is important for you?
Relationships are really important to me.
Okay.
You know, one of the things I did in my 20s was I was in this group and they had everyone write their own obituary.
Oh, wow.
It just sounds like super deep and heavy, but it was actually really good because
Yeah.
it made me realize that when you look back on your life, it's kind of it's really the people that matter. And you know, so when I think about my happiness, I had children really late. I feel very fortunate that I was able to have children. So I have a 10-year-old and 8-year-old twins, and obviously my husband, my partner, is, you know, like enables enables our life to work
Right.
by being so supportive of my
Sure.
career.
Yeah.
My mom is my mom is still my idol in life. My mom has a master's in mathematics, and so she's super smart, and and also just very zen. And so my family, my sisters, my friends, like I feel like those are really important. You talked, the president talked earlier about my running. Like I always
Yes.
thought,
Yes.
I always think about like you have to take care of your health.
Yes.
Because if you don't have your health, you don't have the ability to do other things. It's almost like putting the life mask on, you know?
Yes. First,
right?
before you
It's
help
the-
someone
and
else.
so so health has always been in being outside, you know, because I grew up in a farm in northern Maine has always been really important to me.
Yeah.
But I think of that as foundationally. But like what gives me the most amount of joy is the relationships and people.
I love that. And obviously, a lot of the students in the audience are coming from small towns, and to see all of these accomplishments. When you wrote that obituary years ago, were you a CEO of an organization? Okay.
No, it was never my ambition.
No.
I always just wanted to learn.
Okay.
And that's still really important to me. I want to keep learning and growing, and now I would say more over the last decade or maybe more, giving back too.
What does that look like? We heard a little bit about organizations being important. What's one of those that's important to you?
You know, one of the best organizations I've ever been involved in is the Center for Grieving Children. I haven't been on the board for years now. I'm on the main health board now, but no matter where I would go, and I'll give you an example. I went to a doctor once. I had gone to Brazil on work and gotten sick, and I had gone to Intermed and seen a doctor. And as I was talking to the doctor, he looked at my paper and he said, "You work for WEX. WEX gives back a lot to the Center for Grieving Children. So grateful. I lost my wife and had 2 small children, and it made a big impact in my life." And I can't tell you how many times, and I'm like, okay, I'm on the board for the Center for Grieving Children.
Yes.
I think you should join the board too.
Yes.
But I had so many people over the years just impromptu come up and say, this organization really held me near and dear in a period of time that was really hard for me.
Wow.
So I think of that like as, it's probably the place that I feel the most connected. The Dempsey Center right now, like I really admire what Patrick, the fact that he's taking time to give back.
Yes.
Like he doesn't have to do that. And so I always admire that, Olympia Snow, Senator Snow, the fact that she gives back.
Absolutely.
The people who actually don't have any obligation, they've given a lot in their life, but they actually decide to take the time and put their own effort behind that. I have a lot of respect for that.
And so that becomes important. And I get to, when you talked about your mother being Zen, I get that from you. Like you're
I am very
level.
calm.
Yeah. I'm guessing that's important in your role.
Yeah, I think it is. I think that no matter which way you're geared, you have to think about that. I am very calm, so so I have to think about how I bring the excitement, because for something, I may be super excited, but I'm just kind of mellow about it. So. But I think that what I find people talk a lot about the fact that I smile a lot, and people will look for that, because if I'm not smiling, then they get worried. That, something's wrong. So I have to be conscious of that.
Yes.
That I have to be thoughtful about how I show up in a way.
Because people are always watching you and the role you're in, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Remember the day after I got promoted, they announced the fact I was going to become CEO. And I kept thinking, same person I was yesterday, but I remember walking down a hall and having people just sensing they kind of step back as I walk by.
Oh, interesting.
And realizing that I have to separate the seat, the role of CEO and Melissa, and not take that personally. That it's not, they're not reacting to you because you're the same person you were yesterday.
Right.
They're reacting to the position and being thoughtful that. One of the things I think about a lot is that moment in my day, which may be honestly the least important to me, might be the most important to somebody else, and showing up in a way. And again, that's not because of me; that's because of the role I'm in, and making sure that you're bringing it in the moment the way that you want to. And if you screw it up, frankly, you get another moment. Okay, that's behind me. I'm going to try again. As I go through it and. But people are very tuned in on facial expressions, what words you say, what meetings you go to. That's just part of the deal.
And that's pressure.
Yes. Yes.
From that piece, right?
Yes.
Well, we've been talking for quite some time. I do want to afford a little bit of time from the audience where we have a lot of students out here that may have some interest. Knowing that you hadn't planned to be a CEO, I think is super important to this. I don't know of any class exercises where they've written an obituary, so they may not relate to that directly. But that being said, are there any questions in the audience? If you raise your hand, I'll call on you, and then I'll repeat the question for our stage. Any brave souls? Right down front.
So you mentioned earlier how you have a lot of different locations across the world. If you had to choose one that you would want to work out of, where would it be?
So many different locations. where would you choose to work out of and why, right? And why?
Oh, that is very easy for me. Melbourne, Australia. When I go to Melbourne, there's a kindred spirit to Maine in the fact that people love to be outside. And I'll run down by the river and people are rowing. It's like a big rowing place in the mornings. And so I just find it to be, it's beautiful. People are super friendly. People love being outdoors. The first time I went to an Australia rules football game, which I was very confused about. I was sitting next to this guy saying, I don't understand what's happening here. Can you explain it to me? But all these people just walk into this massive stadium and just hang out together. And it's super fun.
Yeah.
And very cosmopolitan. So if I love London because it's a cool place, and I love New York because they're cool places. But if I had to live, I would live in Melbourne.
Oh, awesome. Good question. Who else? Question. Right in the middle there.
So what kind of ways do you separate your personal life from your work life, and how do you find that work-life balance?
So how do you separate your personal life from your work life and find work-life balance?
I don't think you ever fully do separate it. Like, I actually think about it almost in a, there are some ways, because I have children, one of the things I find interesting, and it doesn't bother me, but it bothers the head of PR, when I get introduced, people often introduce me, and in my bio, they'll talk about the fact I have 3 kids, and which is an unusual thing for people to do, but they do it because I'm a woman and because I do have children. And so in certain ways, I want people to know that and have that be an important part. So there are times when I'm intentionally keeping that in the background. Like, I don't actually ever put my kids on video, or like there's a separation of, they don't come into my office much. But we just had a board member retire, and I threw a party at my house, and my kids presented her with her gift and said a few words on behalf, because she's had an impact on my career, like mentoring me, and then they disappeared, like for the night. So I think that, I remember negotiating a really big deal. We were buying this company years ago, and I remember my, at the time, 3-year-old son was like toddling behind me, like, mama, and I'm like I'm on this phone call, like doing this really important, like hard negotiation. And so sometimes you just can't help it. I'm not 100% home, 0 working, or vice versa, and what I do try to be very conscious of is when I'm home, because my kids are young enough, I can do this. I travel a lot, but when I'm home, I'm present for them while they're up at night, because I can disconnect for a few hours every night, and so I think a lot about that. I also am more conscious in this role of the fact that the friendship with people at work is harder, in this role. Like, I can be friendly, which is different than like deep friends, which I would have been, honestly, and up until the point that I became CEO. But I think this sense of neutrality becomes more important. And so I think of it as like, honestly, people's whole, when you come into work, you're bringing your stuff from home. When you go home, you bring your stuff from work, and there's not like this pure separation that maybe happened a long time ago.
Thank you. Up in the back there.
I was just curious, like, being at the point where you're at and having the success that you've had in your career, how do you move up from here, or are you even looking to move up in a way? Like, how do you attain more goals?
That's actually,
How do you move up in your career or attain more goals? I like how he said that.
Yeah, I think of it more as, how do I not lose the fire in my belly and make sure that I'm still bringing it, and also that I continue to learn. So for me, one of the things I did years ago, we had brought in the speaker. His name's Marshall Goldsmith, who's become a friend of mine. He wrote this book called What Got You There, What got you there won't get you there.
Right.
I'm not saying that exactly right, but it was this idea that you actually have to continue to evolve. And whatever has gotten you to that point in your success is not going to get you into the next leg. And I say that to our employees. If our next goal is $5 billion in revenue, and think about, if we're $2.6 billion now, and it's taken us 40 years to get there, so we're going to have to totally change the way we do it in order to get there over the next 5 years. We have to really think differently, and I think that starts at a leadership level. And so what I feel like is important is that that you're setting objectives that are big and scary but achievable for people, and that you're learning along the way. And the way that I think about my evolution, I spend a lot more time in like networking. Like I spend, tomorrow I'll be with a group of tech CEOs in Boston. Monday I was at a dinner with the CEO of Fiserv, which is a massive company. So I feel like my exposure has changed over time, and therefore you can almost get drawn into different conversations. I joined a public company board, it's 4 years ago, which was new for me. So I think you find ways that both you continue to have the aspiration for the organization, but you individually, you actually have to make a conscious commitment that you have to evolve the way that you lead, the way that you learn, which is why I'm so immersed in AI right now, because I think that it is changing in such a fast pace that it's super exciting. But also, if you're not in it, you're going to be left behind. So I think it's a great question. And the other thing for me is I'm very, very motivated by employment of others. And so the idea that, I think a lot about that, the responsibility I have for the 7,000 people that work there and their families. And that, for me, continues to be very motivational.
Wonderful. I see a hand way in I see two, so you'll have to pick who's going.
I had a question based off of what you just were talking about. You talked about as a leader how you set goals for a group that is very high, scary, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Very achievable. How do you measure that to think that your company can achieve these things, and how do you navigate it if they don't reach those goals?
So setting goals, how do you measure?
Yeah.
And then how do you achieve or not?
It's a great question. This is a skill in its own, because you want to make sure you're pushing yourself, but you don't push so hard that you feel like you failed. And I will say that some years I've gotten that really right, and some years I've not gotten it as right. But what I'm looking for is that tension point of how far can I push, and that it feels really hard, but not so far that people start doing things that they shouldn't do. And then you look externally at benchmarks and say, okay, if that's my aspiration, what are people around me doing? And that helps put some logic behind it to say, does it make sense? And so I think about it two different ways. When I set our budget or goals for the market, that's much more tangible. When I set an aspiration, I'm going to shoot for the sky, and I'm going to have some way of getting there, but it's not perfect, because things will change and you'll have to evolve, but it gets people to think bigger.
So I love the innovation piece. We're going to take one last question. Go right ahead.
So my question is a little different, but then you mentioned that when you were 27, you were close to the CEO. So what qualities did you see in you, or did she see in you?
So what qualities are seen for a CEO?
Well, I don't know exactly what Paul saw in me at the time, honestly. I will say one of the things that has always helped me in my career is I always had this belief in having enough autonomy. So forgive me, but I'm going to call it my FU money. Like, I always had saved enough, saved more than I spent, so that I got to a point where I could always operate the way that I felt like was with the integrity I wanted to operate. So what that meant is that I could take some risk and say things that were unpopular, because the worst thing that was going to happen is I'm going to get fired and I'd be fine. And honestly, like, even when I took this job, like, okay, the worst thing that happens, most public company CEOs don't make it very long. I've been doing this for 11 years, and so it's you have to actually be comfortable with the worst case scenario of what can happen in order to be able to really bring it. And I think that probably showed through even when I was younger, is that ability to be brave enough, but also I like people and it can read people pretty well. That's probably one of my best skills, is my ability to read people. And that combination, I'm guessing, I'd say when I look at who I bring in are people that I feel like can keep information confidential, that are willing to have an opinion and have pretty good instincts on the opinion. They have to be smart, because honestly, you can't train that. And so I bring people into that room where I see those things, where I think, okay, I'm going to get something out of they're going to contribute something to this, and I feel like they're worth investing in. And I think they can take this information and hold it confidential.
Well, that's a list in and of itself. You actually just answered my last question, which was kind of that advice piece. And I love some of those things that you were identifying, and
Yes.
taking a risk.
Take risks.
Not worry about things.
Yeah.
What's the worst that can happen? And that's a positive outlook.
Yes.
Melissa, I really want to thank you
thank
for our
you.
conversation today. Really enjoyable, and I loved learning about both your company and you as a leader. So thank you for joining us on stage.
Thank you, Dean Hanson.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
this. Thank you.
MMG Insurance is a proud sponsor of today's broadcast of Husson University's Distinguished Speaker Series. MMG Insurance, protecting your piece of the world.